All right, I reckon we might just get started. The recording of this will send to you guys afterwards. So anyone who comes in a bit late, will get that as well, and they can head back to the start and see everything they missed. But for those of you that are here, welcome. Let me just pull up a little presentation here. Hopefully you guys can see that. I will say I can't, maybe I can move it across so I can still see your chat. Hopefully it doesn't affect things too much. Now I can still see if you guys send me any questions or anything. There is a little bit of delay, I've learned. So if it takes me a little while to get back to you, I apologize. But feel free to shoot through any questions. We'll go through any questions you might have about the whole thing at the end. But if something occurs to you in the moment, you want to throw it in, go nuts. But to jump into it, welcome to Building Stronger Client Relationships with HubSpot Smart Content, featuring me, Dominic. That is not a photo of me. My apologies, but it's a much better photo. So better for you guys. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the head of digital strategy here at Neighborhood. I've been with them since they were the Raiders back in 2017. I don't know if any of you guys were with us back then, but maybe. Started out as an intern. Started out working with HubSpot basically from day one. First week on the ground was spent doing a lot of very long certifications and watching a lot of videos. And that has not changed in the last 2 years. I work day to day with people who use HubSpot, not to mention here internally when we use it, just making sure that everything sort of runs smoothly and works. And as of recently, Neighborhood is now one of Australia's premier platinum HubSpot partners due to all the work we do, both, again, with our clients and internally. We've got a close relationship with those guys, and we think that the tools they give us are pretty cool. So hopefully you guys agree. Today, I'd like to talk to you guys about smart content. So if we break it down a little bit more, I want to go into why personalization matters in general, how it can and should be used, and sort of the best policies there. We'll talk about smart content, what it is and how to use it, how to build it, stuff like that. Also go through some of the pitfalls that can be associated with smart content, and then some best practices that we've developed here at Neighborhood that we think might help you guys when you use smart content. And then, like I mentioned, any questions that might pop up, we'll have an opportunity at the end to go through those. Oops, sorry, still checking. Cool. If anything goes wrong, by the way, let me know. This, like I mentioned, 23, trying this the first time. So if things aren't going to plan, holler at me because I might not see it otherwise. So let's get into it. Personalization. So personalization is basically stage one of what will become smart content. The big difference is personalization, when it's used in marketing, generally refers to when you refer to someone on a one-to-one basis. So it's when you specifically change the experience based on user data for a single person. At its most basic, or at the very least, one of the early ways it was used that a lot of people would recognize is a name in an email. So whether they put it in the subject line or in the actual content of the email, whenever they address you by name, that's personalization. And that's the one that most people know and use and recognize. Benefits of it saves time for the customer, makes them feel closer to the brand. I think everyone can agree that when you receive an email and it's addressed to you, or you receive any sort of communication and it's addressed to you and it references your specific situation, you get a lot closer to that brand. It doesn't feel like you're just one of the masses, you're a specific person. It also allows marketers to tailor their messaging, recommendations, and offers to the individual. So from our point of view as marketers, it's super helpful in making sure that people get offers and communication that's relevant to them, that they're getting access to things that are going to help them specifically. In the current state, as more and more businesses get access to big data, it's also becoming easier and easier to do. You'll see today that smart content couldn't be more straightforward and easy to use. And that's sort of across the board, not just with HubSpot. I've thrown some examples of some super basic personalization that I just pulled out of my own email account. At the top there, those of you that use Spotify would recognize their year in review type breakdown that goes through everything that you listen to that year and trends and all that sort of stuff. That's personalization. That's using your data to give you a customized experience. I have an email there that addressed me by name for my password reset. Something like that is a good way to make you feel a little bit more secure before you hit a link. You know that it was directed at you when it's just sort of vague and doesn't have a name or anything, you can be a little bit more unsure about whether or not it's the right thing to be doing. And then, of course, Europcar that wanted me to book a romantic getaway this Valentine's Day, which I probably should have done. That'll come back to bite me. All right, so why personalize? Personalizing someone's experience increases their odds of converting. That's not a surprise. I did find one study that said up to 93%, which I think is very impressive. That would be some pretty tight parameters there. I wouldn't say that we've seen 100% or 93% conversion increases, but it is absolutely a great way to improve your conversion rate, is to start personalizing and making sure that the communications and the way that you're speaking to people comes from that sort of one-on-one type feel. 98% of marketers think that personalization has an impact, with 70% considering it to be significant, which is to say strong or extremely strong. I would probably put myself in that extremely strong category. I think that it's a super useful tool, and I think that the more people that use it, the better it gets, and the better the experience is for the user. Prospects and customers expect a somewhat personalized experience at this point. Anyone who's, everyone who receives an email, anyone who has any interaction with any sort of online business at this point kind of expects to have a little bit of personalization. They expect to be treated like a person and not just one of many customers. It's true, I think social media has a big part to play in that, but we've reached a point where when you interact with a brand, you expect them to treat you like a human. Personalization allows you to form closer, stronger relationships with prospects, making you seem more sincere. And that's something that us as marketers, anytime you refer to someone by name, treat them like a person, like I mentioned, they're going to respond more positively, and they're going to treat the things you say with a little bit more, it comes across as more sincere and more legitimate. A great example of that is something like when a brand has to send out a sorry email because they've messed up or something's gone wrong. You're sending an email that addresses everyone by name and apologizes does way better, light years better than an email that just gets sent to everyone and apologizes in bulk. That doesn't just have to happen for an apology, but any sort of communication like that, if you're speaking to the person, is going to have a better return for you as a marketer. And then helping customers is the easiest and fastest way to build loyalty. That's something that we've always talked about in terms of inbound. Personalization helps people. So if you want to build loyalty, help people. If you want to help people, personalize your content. Over on the left there, I have a graph that I pulled from the 2019 Trends in Personalization survey report, which is linked there if you can check it out after this. That breaks down the reasons why marketers use personalization in their opinions, but I think they're also a really good way to just see all of the potential benefits. So things like delivering a better customer experience, increasing their loyalty, generating ROI, driving more leads. They're all good. They're all upsides to that process. Even if you just focus on one, you're going to get the outcome of all of them. Speaking of benefits, some of the benefits of personalizing to big brands that I found. So these are just some case studies. Netflix is a good one. Anyone that knows Netflix will know their recommendations functionality. So when you finish watching something, it'll recommend similar shows and similar movies and whatnot. They believe that saves them over $1 billion a year by preventing people from leaving the service. I double checked on what that meant because it seemed like a lot. They say that they have 90 seconds to get you to watch something else when you either finish watching something or if you just first come to the site, before you'll inevitably go somewhere else, whether it's to a different service or you'll just find something else to do, whatever it may be. People don't like to just keep scrolling looking for something forever. They've worked out 90 seconds is about that limit. If they can get you to pick something in the first 90 seconds after you finish something, then they don't have to try and pay money to get you back. That's where that $1 billion comes into it. So that's pretty interesting. GTech identified different shopping modes and personalized each one. I want to say there was 5 different shopping modes that they found in their user base. They personalized a process for each one of those 5, and they saw almost a triple, well, they did see a triple increase in click-through rates, which is wild. The Kohl's Share Code campaign, which I imagine everyone knows by now, that's not really the normal kind of personalization because it's not using user data. It's just using data in general, but it has the same premise. You're making people feel special because you're personalizing the product and making it feel like it's something that relates to them as individuals. They saw the first increase in sales in over a decade, which is loose. Also kind of loose that Coke hasn't had an increase in sales in 10 years, but I guess that's what happens when you're Coke. EasyJet's 2015 campaign, celebrating 20 years, they put out an email, kind of like Spotify. They took a bunch of content about people's travel habits about the travel they'd been on and the places they'd been, all that sort of stuff, put it into an email, sent it to everyone. That email had 100% higher than normal click opens, with 25% click-through, which is pretty good for an email compared to your standard EDM, all because it was personalized and it made each person feel like an individual. So smart content. Smart content, as I mentioned, is a bit like personalization, but different in that you're not focusing on a single person, you're focusing on a group of people. So instead of personalizing for Joe Blow down the road, you're personalizing for everyone that matches Joe Blow's description. Smart content is basically the HubSpot content to a universal concept called dynamic content, which is content that changes based on some sort of exterior factor, normally data. It allows you to customize the content of an email, a landing page, or a website page, something like that, based on the person who's viewing it. Has a couple of different ways of doing that. For landing pages and website pages, it's predominantly done through the tracking cookie. And having a tracking cookie means that HubSpot knows who you are and information about you. If it's an email, it's done via lists and stuff like that, data that you have in your CRM. The major benefit of smart content means that you can have multiple messages inside a single piece of content. So think of an email that gets sent to your list that has different messages depending on who's reading it, but you only have to send the email once. That's the major benefit there. In most cases with smart content, you could make multiple emails and get basically the same outcome, but that means instead of writing one email and having 3 different versions of it internally, you'd have to write 3 emails, set up 3 different lists, run them all separately, like judge them all separately. This way you just have the one and the content is the bit that changes. One of the major benefits of smart content means that you can speak to different groups the way they want to be spoken to. So everyone has their own language they speak, and I mean that both literally as language and in the tone and the way you speak. Smart content gives you the ability to change that tone, change that language, depending on the person who is receiving it. A good example of that is buyer personas, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if you have a buyer persona, say for us, for example, we have buyer personas that sit at the very top of a business, like your GMs, your CEOs, your C-suite. And then you also have your buyer personas that, or we have our buyer personas, I should say, sit sort of down at the marketing coordinator level, sort of the bottom rung of the marketing chain. They should be spoken to very differently. They have very different challenges and very different goals, but they also, we just would be a lot more casual talking to our marketing coordinators who are a lot like us, as opposed to someone like a CEO. So smart content gives us the ability to change the way we speak to people without having to rewrite the email 6 times and send it to different people. Why I think everything should be smart content. So I'm a pretty big proponent of, if not making everything smart, at least thinking about making it smart before you put it out there, because generally, even if it's just something minor, it's something that you would probably may not have considered. First and foremost, it's an excellent way to customize for buyer personas. Like we just mentioned, everything that you do, everything that you write, every piece of content you make should be aimed at a buyer persona. In the event that you're doing something that goes out to more than one buyer persona, say newsletter, EDM, a blog, anything like that, that's where smart content should be making sure that they're still getting a unified experience. It allows you to speak to people in their own language. Like I mentioned, that generally references things like tone, but also it has the ability to change based on language. So when I say that, I mean in the case of website pages and landing pages, we'll go through this in a second, but you can change the content based on the language the browser is set in. So say, for example, someone opens it in Italy and they have their browser set to Italian. You can either change your content to be Italian, or maybe it changes to just be about Italy, but it can change based on that, is the important part. It can be used to segment against any piece of custom data you have on file. So no matter what the piece of data is, if you use the list function and the cookie is installed, then you can segment it however you like. It can be as vague as you want. You can, if you know someone's favorite kind of hat, you can make a list for it and then segment by that. You can say, this guy loves fedoras. I'm going to change this content to be about fedoras because this group of people have also, they love them. It allows you to customize offers and language based on the prospect's place in the buyer journey. So when I say that, I mean one of the ways we use it at Neighborhood that we find very effective is if you take, for example, something like a blog. At the bottom of that blog, there's a CTA, as all good blogs should have. And that CTA might point towards an ebook consideration stage, which makes sense because your blog might be awareness stage and you want to try and move people down that journey. When someone who's already at consideration stage or someone who's at decision stage comes to that blog, that CTA is not of any use to them. It's not doing anything. It's functionally pointless. So what you can do is set it up to be smart so that when that person comes to the page, it's not the consideration ebook they see, but maybe a link to a meeting or a link to your pricing page. It's pushing them further down the chain, but only them, because they are the minority, but you still don't want to waste that space and waste that opportunity. Finally, you can customize offers based on how a lead found you. That's based on referral source. Maybe, for example, you have an offer on your homepage. You go and do some podcast advertising or something, and you say, hey, if someone comes to you from the podcast link, then you change it to be whatever you spoke about in the podcast. You make it a special offer for them or something, just so that the people who are coming from somewhere specific get their own experience. So what does smart content look like? To show you that, I am just going to back out of my PDF, and I'm just going to switch over to this here. So this here is an example of an email that I have set up, smart content email. Again, let me know if for whatever reason this screen sharing isn't working. I can't see, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed. What you have here is, just an email, and you can see I've highlighted the heading here. The heading is pretty vague. Marketing with HubSpot, we have a webinar coming up. Let's say, for example, we have a couple of different buyer personas, is probably the easiest way to describe it. And let's say we have one that's focused on leads and one that's focused on revenue. I think I can make a better headline here for each one of those, but I don't really want to blend them. I don't want to try and mix my messaging and say we're great at leads and revenue and also just general stuff. This is where smart content comes into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this here. If it wants me to. Yep, I'm going to click more and go down to add smart rule. Now you can see here, because this is an email, I'm only able to pick list membership or lifecycle stage. These are the two types of smart content that are based on CRM data. The ones that are grayed out are what we call anonymous data, and that's something that you can pull from the browser, but it only works for website pages and landing pages. So we'll cover those in a second, but for now, we'll just use list membership. Those of you who are familiar with lists will know that you can segment your data however you want using lists. You can get a list, you can make a list of the most specific group of people you want, so it's pretty powerful. I'm going to pick, I have two here, so I have leads focused. Let's pick that one first. So I've selected that, and it's made a list. I can't pick more than one if I want. If I want to pick leads focused and also revenue focused, I can do that if I do have a joint message I want to say, but for now, let's just do leads. Create that. And you'll see over here on the left, my smart rule is now listed as content leads one, leads focused. So let's change this and say marketing. Let's say instead of marketing with HubSpot, say looking to grow your leads. We have a webinar coming up. So now this is something that is specific to webinars, specific to leads, sorry. If I want to go into that, I can go up here to my rule, change it back to default content, and it shifts back to default content. When I say default content, that's still important because that's what people are going to see if they don't fit into your smart rule. So I've set up a rule here for list one. Everyone who isn't in list one gets default. That's just how it works. So you always have to make sure your default content still gets the message across and still sells whatever you're trying to sell, even if it's not as specific as it could be. Let's add another smart rule. We'll add one for list two this time, revenue. Make sure it's revenue. Yep. Let's change marketing with HubSpot to grow your revenue. Not the most imaginative headline, not my best copywriting, but I'm under the pump. So we have our three now. So we have list two, list one, looking to grow leads, and default, which is just marketing with HubSpot. Maybe I want to change something else. I have an image down here. Maybe I want to change it for some people. Not sure why. It's a good looking photo, I reckon. But let's say we'll add a smart rule and we'll say if they're in that second list, revenue, maybe we'll just change it to be a different photo. Maybe they get something different. Maybe it's not as important that they see this offer. Maybe we want them to see a different offer. So I'm just going to replace that. I'm going to swap it for, what's a good one? Oh, picture of Teddy in a graduation hat. That's a good one. And we are done. All right, so you can see here it's telling me displaying a smart rule for selected contact list. If I click that, I have the opportunity to change it back to the default one, and it will say this is a smart module. It'll do the same thing at the top here. This is a smart module. If I want to see how it looks for those people, I can go in here to preview. I can say I want to look at this contact. So I've set up these lists so I know who's in them. So I know, for example, that I've set myself up to be in list 1. If I open that, it should change to leads. Yep, looking to grow your leads in my phone, looking to grow leads, etc. Rad. Let's try the second one. I know I put Trav in that one. So we'll try Trav. Ooh, maybe we won't. I don't know where his contact's gone. Oh well, you just have to trust me. It works for him as well. But you find a contact who's in the list you're referring to and use it to check how it looks. All right. Let's say that's an email and we have it set up. If we want to manage those, we can just click it again. You can see over here, smart rule variation. You can choose to manage it, and in managing it, you can go through and delete. You can see here that I can't pick a different type now. I can only pick list membership. Once you pick a rule, once you pick a way to segment, that's the only option you get. But you can have up to 20 variations of that rule. So I could have 20 different lists, and each list sees a different thing if I wanted. But I couldn't have, for example, one list who sees something and then all my opportunities see something else. Once you've picked one, you have to stick with that one. So just clear those, save it, and we're back to normal. Now we're back to our default. Do the same thing with landing pages, exactly the same. You can see here I have a heading, I have a form. I'm going to change the heading first. So go back here, and we'll go this bit here. I want to make this module smart. Here I can pick these other ones. So say, for example, I want to say device type, and then I can say, I want to have a different experience for people who look at it on a tablet, for example. And then you can change it based on tablet. Those other ones that you saw there, just to go through them, country is based on the IP address of the country the IP address is coming from. Device type, like we just mentioned, is how they're looking at this thing. Referral source is where they've come from to get to this page, or this page. And then preferred language is the language that the browser is set to. So for me, it would be English. If you're in Italy, it's probably Italian, etc. I can also change over here the form. So forms and rich text and CTAs are the things that you can change with smart content. If I wanted to, I can go back to my content, pick the form up here, make module smart, and same rules. So maybe I pick list, maybe I pick to, maybe I pick my revenue, and then I can change the content of that module. Maybe I have my own special revenue form. Apply changes. And it's going to keep looking like it's the default because I'm currently looking at this website like that. You just have to know there's a smart rule there, so it can be a little hard to keep track of. But if you highlight that region, you'll see up the top here, under smart variation is where it's keeping track of what variations I've built out. Another thing to keep in mind is the order the variations come in. So from top down, it's going to run through them in order. So if someone belongs to two lists, if you have someone who's in list 1 and list 2, it's going to check them against list 1. If they're in 1, because this is how I had it set up, if they're in 1, it'll show them 1. If they're not, it'll go to 2. And if they're in 2, it'll show them 2. So you have to be really careful about the order of your rules. That's why they've given you the ability to rearrange it. So maybe I want it to check against list 1 first, then check a different list, and then check list 2. That's the order it will happen in. All right, let's jump back because I am running a little bit behind, aren't I? So that's a pretty brief understanding of how to build it. If you have any questions. Okay. At this point, I should be back on my presentation, hopefully. If so, if not, let me know. But I should be back on the presentation here. Okay, so what do you need to do to effectively use dynamic content? First off, a robust segmentation strategy. So making sure that you have a really good understanding of the different segments in your CRM, the different groups of people, and what sets them apart so that you can more effectively create content for each one. Strong buyer personas that are based on real data. That's an obvious one. If you want to use it for buyer persona information, it's really important that your buyer personas are really strong and you have a really good understanding of what sets them apart and how they're different and how to communicate with them. Doing that is the first step to effectively using smart content. Consistently reviewing and refreshing to ensure your personalizations are up to date. So smart content, you run the risk of, because you have it hidden on those pages when you set it up, it's all sort of nested up the top there. If you go and change content in the future, it can be really easy to overlook changing the smart content as well, which means that if you do reuse that, or if someone comes to that page after you've made those edits, there's a chance they'll still be seeing old content because the smart content wasn't updated when it should have been. You need a strategy for collecting data that isn't too aggressive. Smart content's only as good as the data it's based on. So you need to be able to collect that data from people. Just sort of generalizing here and saying that don't be too aggressive with how you get that data because it's going to make people not want to give it to you. So just in a general sense, make sure that your data that you're collecting and the way you collect it works for you, works for your company, and is encouraging people to give you as much data as they can, because the more data they give you, the more smart content you can make. Finally, a strong link between your content and CRM. That's something that comes out of the box with HubSpot. But if you're trying to do this in other services, and it is possible to do this in other services, they don't all call it smart content. I think WordPress, for example, calls it dynamic content. But if you are using another service, just make sure that the link to the CRM is really strong and robust, that it's doing things like updating constantly, that edits get pushed through immediately, because you need it to be accurate and up to date. Otherwise, you're going to be showing people stuff that's not relevant anymore. Some cons. So it's not all ideal, it's not all perfect. There are some drawbacks to smart content. The biggest one, I think, is that for landing pages and website pages, there's a reliance on cookies. Now, cookies are sort of falling out of fashion with marketing, with consumers, I should say, from marketers, because people are getting a little bit more wise to how it's used to track them. Everyone is now given the option to turn them off, especially in Europe with GDPR. You have to be very careful about what data you keep on people and how you use it, stuff like that. Website pages and landing pages rely on that cookie to show smart content. They need to know who's looking at the page to be able to show them the right content. So it means that someone has to have filled in a form in the last 13 months. I think it's the tracking cookie, which is a 13-month cookie. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Same as if the person has turned off cookies, smart content just won't function. It's going to show you the default every time, because that cookie is the only thing it has to understand who you are. So that makes it a little bit harder to use on landing pages and web pages, because the odds of it not working are relatively high. On the opposite side of that, emails don't have that problem, because emails use CRM data. That's why you can only use the list or the lifecycle option, because it's pulling directly from the CRM, and whether or not your email address is in one of those lists. They can't use the anonymous data. So that's the flip side there. You don't have to worry about cookies, but you can't use language, country, referral source, or like tablet, phone type thing. You are a little limited in where you can use smart content. For those of you who know a little bit about the development strategy in HubSpot, it only works on rich text, CTA, and form modules, which still gives you a fair bit of potential in terms of the way you design things, but it does mean there's some things you can't use it on. Example, I think from memory, something like a header text, I don't think you can use smart content on. It has to be rich text. You can only have one rule per module, which is, as I mentioned, if you pick lists, it has to all be lists. You can't mix and match. And then there's a max of 20 rule variations, as I mentioned. So if you do pick lists, you can have up to 20 different lists, but no more. GDPR, I mentioned before, makes it very difficult to get information off people and use it. You have to be very clear about why you're collecting information and how it's going to be used from the front when you first do it. So that's sort of something to keep in mind. Right now, it doesn't really affect us in Australia, but it might in the future. It looks like that's the way the world's heading, so it's something to be mindful of. Content must be kept accurate and up to date. So you have to be very careful about when you use smart content and it's based around a field or a piece of information that might change in time. Say, for example, if you create smart content based on marital status would be an easy one. That's something that might conceivably change in a relatively short period. So unless someone has been consistently updating that and making sure it's accurate, then you'll be showing someone something that's out of date and inaccurate before too long. So you just need to make sure that what you do connect to smart content from a data point of view, you feel pretty confident isn't changing too consistently. And if it is changing, just keep prompting people to keep their information up to date. And then finally, not everyone gets access to smart content. It's something that's only available to Marketing Pro and Enterprise, which doesn't really affect too many people, but it's something worth keeping in mind. If you go and encourage someone to get on this train, it's not something that everyone can access. So that brings us to our best practices. And I'll say that my next slide here is questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to start putting them in now. So the lag has a chance to catch up. So our best practices, use it where you can, but don't base your whole strategy around it. When I say that, I mean that there's a time and a place for smart content, and I think it can be used in a lot of places, but I don't think it should be what your whole strategy is based around. It isn't, you can't rely on it that much, especially when it's a web page or a landing page. The fact that someone who doesn't have cookies enabled might show up and not see whatever you need them to see just makes it too untrustworthy, let's say. So use it just to add a little bit to your existing campaigns. Always make sure the default content works for everyone. Same deal. If they do turn up and they can't use smart content because of a cookie issue or whatever, make sure that that default content is always going to work for everyone in a pinch. You can always make it better with smart content, but the base level should work fine all by itself. Don't get too fancy and complex. I said you can have 20 variations. That doesn't mean always have 20 variations. I know from experience that when you try and add a lot of layers onto stuff like that, it can get pretty unwieldy pretty quickly and lead to all sorts of issues. So do what you can and do what you need to, but don't just start building for the fun of it, because it can get a bit full on. Always remember to prioritize making life easier for users. This kind of ties into that inbound thing. You want to make sure that when you do smart content, when you do anything really, you're doing it for the benefit of the customer and the consumer. If you find you're only doing it to make your life easier, it's probably worth reassessing whether or not it's worthwhile, because it's very easy to do something that makes it easier for you, but makes the experience worse for them. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then finally, make sure that data is kept fresh and make sure that data is consistently updated, and that the people that you are segmenting using it know to keep on top of it. And that's about everything I had. So I can't see any questions just yet. If you have any, hit me now. Otherwise, the plan from here is I'll send everyone who's here a copy of the presentation and this webinar in general. I'll also make available some other bits and pieces that we have about smart content in some following emails. And then, yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback, given this is the first one, and I think it's going to become a bigger part of what we do. No questions? No? All right. Well, in that case, let's turn that back on. For those of you who are in here, thanks for coming. I hope you guys got something out of it. Keen to hear your thoughts, keen to hear how you think it went. Otherwise, I'll catch you at the next one. Cheers, guys.